WSAV Storm Team 3 on your side presents Storm Watch. Brought to you by your Touchstone Energy Cooperatives.
Good evening. I'm Storm Team 3 Chief Meteorologist Chris Allred, and this is Storm Watch 2020. This year's hurricane season is moving at the fastest pace in history, and yet tonight we are only halfway through the Atlantic hurricane season. We haven't even hit the peak of hurricane season, which is in September. 2020, it's a year of breaking records and facing the unknown, fighting a deadly virus, weathering an economic hurricane, and tracking the tropics. Tonight, we will get you ready, informed, and prepared. It's now time for Storm Watch 2020. The new numbers are out. The already busy season will likely get even more hectic. Forecasters say get ready for an extremely active hurricane season. So active, in fact, that the normal list of names could run out. See, usually only 21 names are assigned for storms each season. But this year's prediction, 25 named storms, the highest number ever forecast. Now, if this forecast pans out, 2020 would be the second most active season in history, behind only 2005, which had 28 named storms, including Hurricane Katrina. So here's the new prediction. 19 to 25 named storms. That's winds greater than 39 miles per hour. Of these, 7 to 11 are predicted to become hurricanes, winds greater than 74 miles per hour. And then of these, 3 to 6 are forecast to become major hurricanes. That's winds greater than 111 miles per hour. And this prediction is far above an average year. Based on 1981 to 2010 data, we usually see 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 of those will be major hurricanes. So why is it supposed to be such a busy season this year? Well, there are several reasons. First, we have warmer than average sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Next, reduced wind shear. Also, weaker tropical Atlantic trade winds. And finally, an enhanced West African monsoon. Compare all of this to last year. At this point in the season for 2019, we'd only seen a couple of named storms. A much slower start, but the season was far from boring. The 2019 Atlantic hurricane season ended up as the 4th most active season in history. The strongest storm of the season was Dorian, a classic Atlantic hurricane. Dorian became the first Category 5 storm of the year. Sustained winds peaked at 185 miles per hour. Dorian devastated the Bahamas, causing more than $7 billion in damage. Dorian eventually turned to the north and made landfall briefly along the Outer Banks as a Category 1 hurricane, a track that fortunately missed the coastal Empire Low Country. But if that storm had shifted even just a little bit to the west, our story would be a completely different one to tell. We're all currently dealing with a global crisis, and while we hope life will return to normal in the next few months, hurricane season isn't over until later this year. The last day is November 30th. WSAV News 3's Danny Dykes is on your side with how you can be better prepared.
It's difficult to think about future natural disasters when our current way of life has completely shifted.
People are having a hard time putting food on their table right now. So thinking about how they're going to take care of their home if a disaster were to come, that's tough.
Chelsea Sawyer with Chatham Emergency Management Agency says she has the tough job of not only dealing with the times, but also of our location. She understands the uncertainty surrounding aspects like public transportation in a COVID-19 world, but she says high winds and storm surge could have a more direct impact.
If there's a hurricane coming this way and we have to evacuate, there's no choice. We have to evacuate.
Thousands of people normally file in and out of the Savannah Civic Center to get to shelter. Sawyer says that's now a government-assisted assembly area. SEMA has doubled the amount of charter buses to prevent overcrowding and is requiring all riders to wear their masks.
We have seen the increase of those that need help. I am worried that many people who have gone through a time without jobs when they were living paycheck to paycheck anyway are finding it tough to make it through.
Major Paul Egan with the Salvation Army says he's working with SEMA to help create more space at shelters. Each one will also include an isolation area. But if you prefer to make your own travel plans this hurricane season, Sawyer recommends you call the hotel in advance to find out its COVID-19 policy and procedures.
That doesn't cost you anything. Start thinking through that process and being ready, and I promise it'll make things just a little bit easier.
Danny Dykes, WSAV News 3, on your side.
We are on your side, helping you prepare with a section devoted to safety. You will find it at wsav.com/Hurricane Central. I will talk a lot about our hurricane resources online this hour because WSAV News 3 is on your side with the most up-to-date information available to you whenever you need it. Now, the pandemic is complicating our local response to a potential hurricane. Some, especially the elderly, fear evacuations could put them more at risk of catching COVID-19. WSAV News 3's Edward Moody is on your side with a closer look.
When a hurricane hits, the best you can do at any age is be prepared.
We have storage rooms here filled with bottled water, with food.
Made of concrete and steel, Savannah's Buckingham South Assisted Living Facility was built to withstand a Category 4 storm.
We've got pilings hundreds of feet into the ground. We have a brand new backup generator.
Because of their fortress-like setting, elderly residents here often have the luxury of riding out a storm, but many other local seniors don't.
They are telling you to evacuate. Do not let the fear of coronavirus be the thing that keeps you from leaving.
In Georgia, seniors and people with special health needs can register for government assistance to evacuate and find shelter during a hurricane.
So if they are wheelchair bound, if they have some other functional needs, that we can make sure that they're going to be comfortable wherever they go. GMA
spokesperson Lisa Rodriguez-Presley says plans are already in place to help protect our most vulnerable from COVID-19.
They're doing temperature checks at every shelter. They'll be doing questionnaires and checking, to see if people are at risk for coronavirus or may have been exposed. And there are things in place to help people isolate or maybe even send them to a separate facility if they need to because of coronavirus.
In Savannah, Edward Moody, WSAV News 3, on your side.
The COVID-19 global pandemic has wreaked havoc on all of our lives in numerous ways. While it's hard to imagine having to also face a hurricane this year on top of it, many important questions have been asked. How will evacuations work? Will public shelters still be available? Storm Team 3 meteorologist Kyle Dennis has some answers.
Hurricane season amid a pandemic, a unique challenge for emergency leaders.
The hard thing with the pandemic is everything we plan on for hurricanes is based on past experiences, past storms. Because we don't have a blueprint going forward of best practices, that's what makes this very challenging.
The pandemic is forcing a reevaluation of hurricane response, especially when it comes to evacuations. The Red Cross operates shelters and has new guidelines to keep people safe from the storm and the virus. They hope to first place people in places like hotels or campgrounds before congregate shelters like schools and community centers. But those are inevitable in large-scale storms.
If we have to open up a shelter like that, we're going to be doing, approved screening. You're going to get your temperature taken when you come in. You're going to have be asked those CDC-approved questions when you come in. If you have any symptoms, you're going to be isolated. There'll be isolation areas in those shelters.
The Red Cross says it will be doing extra cleaning. Workers will have PPE and they'll provide masks for people staying in the shelter. They're also ensuring social distancing.
Have the cots spread out more. We're going to be staggering mealtime.
But that means shelter capacity could be cut significantly and more shelters would have to open. Things may be different this year, and that's why planning ahead as much as possible is even more critical than ever. The more you prepare before there is even a threat of a storm, the less stressed you will be when eventually there is one and you need to take action.
Navigating an evacuation amidst a pandemic would be unprecedented for all of us. WSAV will continue to be on your side as new or changing information comes out. So stay with us when Storm Watch 2020 continues, getting out of town safely.
During Hurricane Matthew, this parking lot was flooded with a foot of water, causing water damage to several cars. To avoid this, park your vehicle on higher ground after you fill up your gas tank all the way. Also be sure to have cash on hand because electronic payments after the storm may not work.
Welcome back to Storm Watch 2020. Chatham Emergency Management Agency has a plan to manage 2 disasters at once. That is, if a hurricane hits the coastal empire during the coronavirus pandemic. WSAV News 3's Kelly Antonacci is on your side with what you need to know.
In addition to preparing your families to evacuate from a hurricane threat, you've also got to prepare them as to how to handle a COVID environment outside of what your normal environment is.
SEMA Director Dennis Jones says first, prepare to wear a mask if you evacuate from the Civic Center. It's a requirement. Jones is requesting from the county more than $50,000 for PPE for those who forget. And prepare for SEMA to distance groups on buses. Jones says 2 county bus contractors are ready for the extra work.
We're treating that as if everybody who comes through the center, it's assumed that they have some version of COVID along the way. So because of that, we're going to make sure that everybody has the right personal protective equipment.
That's especially important for our most fragile population on the hurricane registry. Tammy Brown says the state is helping the county find more shelter locations. And this year, some may have to evacuate farther than Augusta. There's also a plan for COVID patients.
Shelters will have separate areas where they can isolate if someone did develop some symptoms. Or if anyone did test positive, they would have a separate place for them.
And caregivers will monitor people every day. The state is still looking for a spot for people who usually evacuate to assisted living facilities. Right now, those facilities are not allowing any more people inside. Kelly Antonacci, WSAV News 3, on your side.
Know how to get out of town safely now, before an evacuation order. Download the Storm Team 3 Hurricane Guide, available on WSAV.com. It has evacuation routes for the coastal empire and the low country. We all know the basics of preparing our homes when a hurricane threatens. Boarding up your windows and making a list of your belongings for insurance claims are just 2 of them. But there are so many other things you can do now, before, and after a storm hits. Storm Team 3 meteorologist Alyssa Carsley has more.
After every major storm, local stores are flooded with shoppers looking for extras they need. Linda Dozier of Lowe's Home Improvement says there are basic steps you can take to be prepared.
I would look at your trees.
Branches that are dangling too close to your home will need to be trimmed.
So if you're just trying to cut a couple of branches that maybe have broken because of the wind, then, just a lopper is all you're going to need.
If you are savvy with the chainsaw, make sure it is in tip-top shape.
If you're going to tune up your chainsaw, is your chain sharp enough? Did you use it a lot last year? Does it need to be replaced?
Cities generally want branches and debris cut into 2 to 4 foot lengths, bundled with twine. Don't forget, you'll likely encounter splinters and sharp edges as you haul debris to the curb.
But when you're getting ready to scoop up all that debris and start to clean up, make sure you glove up so that you're safe and your hands stay safe.
There are different gloves for different jobs and perfect sizes for kids if they want to help out.
Of course, you've got to have the batteries that go with the radio.
And don't forget, one of the biggest and overlooked hazards after a storm, the bugs.
Once it gets hot and sticky, those mosquitoes go crazy.
Remember to dump out any standing water and use repellents on yourself and your yard. If you want to up your game, consider tarps and generators.
Again, there are a variety, depending upon if you just want to plug your refrigerator in because you don't want to lose all your food.
Luckily, there are emergency response teams that will help keep shelves stocked during emergencies.
Whatever we need here in the store for the customers, it's going to be available.
If you have to evacuate, you need to make sure your car is ready to go. Check your emergency kit now. Make sure you have jumper cables, a flashlight, a blanket, and bottled water. You should have batteries too. Print out your evacuation route information. Don't rely on your smartphone apps. During evacuations, you'll be required to travel according to the zone you live in. Most important, have your car serviced before you need to leave town.
I would do it almost immediately because storms are unpredictable. They may think next week, it could be here in 3 days. You don't want to wait to the last minute because then you're going to find that problem that you can't get out of town. The best way is to be proactive on everything and just have yourself ready to rock and roll.
Make sure you have a full tank of gas before you evacuate too. You may need to be on the road for a long time before you can fill up again, and an empty gas can should be part of your emergency kit. When Stormwatch 2020 returns, we head to the islands, where a project is underway to replenish the plants that grow on the beaches, and to learn what some homeowners are doing to protect their homes before the next storm hits. Welcome back to Stormwatch 2020. When storms hit our beaches, we lose precious vegetation. This spring, efforts were made to replenish the dunes on the north end of Tybee Island. WSAV News 3's Kelly Antonacci shows us how the multi-million-dollar project is working.
Tybee Island City Manager Sean Gillen says there are tens of thousands of pieces of dune vegetation all across the island. He says there's a big fine if you walk on them, but there's a reason behind that.
By stomping on the seagrasses, you're killing it off, the root system starts to die, and it destabilizes the dune.
Gillen says that can happen often on an island with 1.2 million visitors every year, especially if it goes unchecked.
If you get too many people walking over in a single spot, it'll start to wear the dune down, but really you're killing off the vegetation.
He says sea oats make up most of that vegetation. The city is using state and federal funding to plant them along dunes in phases. This is part of phase 2. The city will plant the rest in the fall.
The root systems go deep, so these things act like rebar in cement. So the root systems go down to the base level and holds that dune together as it gets hit by wave action.
Couple that with new fencing, and Gillen says storm surge shouldn't be as big of a problem.
That sand fencing is there on purpose to knock down the sand and help establish additional dunes and help those dunes grow naturally.
He says the city is experimenting with the fencing. They're putting it at different angles and adding layers to see what works best.
These dunes during a heavy storm will get destroyed, but they'll last longer and be able to absorb the impact of a storm surge.
Gillen calls the project a full renourishment. In total, they've pumped 1.3 million cubic yards of sand on the beach. He says the island lost a bit of sand during Tropical Storm Isaias, but the Army Corps of Engineers will examine that next week. Gillen says in addition to more work on the dunes, they're also building more bathrooms and showers here on the south end. Reporting on Tybee Island, Kelly Antonacci, WSAV News 3 on your side.
From replenishing Tybie's dunes to fortifying Tybee homes, some island homeowners are getting government help to lift their houses above the flood zone. WSEV.com Now reporter Ashley Williams spoke with one of them about the project.
If I get any more elated, my feet will be off the ground.
Larry Piper's spirits are lifted about as high as his house, which now sits 12 feet in the air. The Tybee homeowner is one of 10 others to receive grant money through FEMA and GEMA. The $1.5 million flood mitigation grant will help the houses better withstand future floods.
Once we get the pilings in, get the cross braces in for the subflooring and all that, it'll be like 11-foot elevation. Plenty of room to drive our cars, trucks, and boats under.
Piper's Lewis Avenue home sits right on the marsh. Hurricane Irma was a nightmare for him and his wife, Donna. 28 inches of water flooded their home.
We were in the house when it flooded. My wife stepped into the yard and the water hit her 4 foot deep out here in the yard.
The Pipers and 9 other families only have to cover 15% of the cost. FEMA handles 75%, while the state pays the remaining 10%.
Everyone I've spoken to is excited to get going with it. They are ready to get lifted. They'd love to be up in the air before we have a hurricane, if that happens again. Getting flooded is exhausting at the very least.
Piper agrees. He hopes never to see another flood event in his lifetime.
And I'm 72 years old, so hopefully we'll have another 20, 30-year span without a hurricane.
Ashley Williams, WSAV.com Now.
Tybee City officials first applied for the grant money back in 2018. They say they're glad to get the project up and running. The flood mitigation grant funding runs through July 2021. You can learn more about the project at WSAV.com/Tybee Grant. Stay with us when Storm Watch 2020 returns, when floodwaters rise. Our team goes to work to give you important information on what to do before, during, and after flooding happens.
When we are tracking a tropical system, we have new updates coming out every 3 hours, and this can lead to a backup of old information on your social media feeds. Because of this, always check the timestamp of a post. Don't assume a post is up to date because it's closest to the top of your feed. For example, this post here is 3 days old at the time I saw it. Impacts and conditions could be very different for us by this point. By checking the date and time, you'll get the correct, up-to-date information.
Welcome back to Storm Watch 2020. Whether we're threatened by a tropical system here in the coastal empire and low country or dealing with extremely heavy rain from afternoon thunderstorms, flooding is a major issue for us. Learning more about water levels and what influences them can help communities to be better prepared. Storm Team 3 meteorologist Scott Roberts tells us about what is being done in Chatham County.
During severe weather, water levels can rise very quickly, and it could be unpredictable. But a team of researchers with Georgia Tech and the Chatham County Emergency Management Agency are working to make them more predictable. After the flooding from Hurricane Irma, researchers decided that we need more information about water levels in the county. The Fort Pulaski tide gauge is the only water monitor within 40 miles along the coast. This makes it difficult to accurately predict the timing of high and low tide along with storm surge. Georgia Tech has been developing water level sensors. They are currently being deployed throughout the county. They will have the highest density of water monitors in the world. I spoke to Dr. Russ Clark with Georgia Tech, who is one of the lead researchers with the Smart Sea Level Sensor project.
We were able to work with the community to build and deploy now more than 50 of the sensors that we developed at Georgia Tech.
The data from the sensors is currently being fed into a high-resolution computer simulation that creates a 3-day forecast for water levels. In 2019 with Hurricane Dorian, this model did a good job predicting water levels within Chatham County. If the storm surge had come at high tide, the model predicted Tybee would have been flooded with a 6-foot water level difference.
Ultimately, to have better fine-grained data to be able to predict what's going to be vulnerable and when.
I-95 has been historically used as a dividing line for areas that are vulnerable in flooding events.
It requires a good bit of work, but the goal, of course, is to ultimately be able to say, those details of which streets, which neighborhoods, where we need to focus resources, rather than a simple, everything east of 95.
Now, with more data becoming available and different groups coming together, our community is going to be better prepared to weather future storms and flood events. Scott Roberts, WSAV News 3, on your side.
As the Smart Sea Level Sensor program expands, the data from the sensors and computer modeling will be used to help emergency managers make better plans and eventually help communities quick to recover from flooding in the years to come. Now, in terms of flooding, how do you know the risk for your property? Do you need flood insurance, and how much? WSAV News 3's Joanne Merrigan says you actually have a personal advisor. Just reach out to your local floodplain administrator.
It bothers me when someone says, I didn't know about flood insurance. I didn't know about the flood dangers.
Michael Blakely is Chatham County's floodplain administrator. He doesn't spend time looking at maps all day. He wants to come to your house. So what does a floodplain administrator do?
That individual can help that homeowner make a decision about how much flood insurance is needed based on their potential to be flooded. We can also give you information on the flooding history within your neighborhood and your community.
We meet at what's now a vacant lot, but not long ago a house stood here, one that was repeatedly flooded.
FEMA has a program to try to remove these homes off their repetitive flood loss list.
Through the FEMA program, the county purchased this land and demolished the house. Now there's open space here, something to improve drainage and maybe the cost of your flood insurance.
And then that open space also is used by the local community for credit under the CRS program to get additional points.
CRS is the community rating system. And when Chatham County does things like demolishing this house or raising this house on Tybee to prevent future flooding, it provides a discount on the cost of what local homeowners pay for national flood insurance. Right now, that discount is 25%.
Do you know your flood zone?
Because of climate change, Blakely says more of us do face a risk of flooding, so begin by informing yourself.
Is your house built high enough? Do you know if there's been any flood losses in the past at your property or around your property?
He also says while flood insurance may be required,
typically the flood is not going to impact the foundation all the way to the attic or the top of the chimney.
It's good to recognize the payout you would actually get versus the value of your home. He doesn't advise you overinsure, but says do something.
Having a flood policy, period, that's the main thing.
Blakely says your local floodplain administrator wants you to reach out. He says you'll get straight answers, not just about current maps, but your neighborhood, what's happened in the past, and the chances of what might come.
But it makes me sleep better at night when I know I've done all that I can to let people know about the risk of flooding.
Joanne Merrigan for Stormwatch 2020.
Many of you have a federally backed mortgage. Will need to buy flood insurance if your zone requires it. But a lot of people who don't officially have to purchase it, they often buy it anyway because of changing concerns about localized flooding and more storms. Now in 2016, Hurricane Matthew was the first big hit to the coastal empire and low country in years, bringing dangerous storm surge, damaging winds, and flooding rain. Storm Team 3 meteorologist Kyle Dennis takes a look back at some important lessons learned.
Hurricane Matthew is a storm no one will soon forget in the coastal empire and low country. It served as an important reminder that our area is not immune from nature's most spectacular storms, and many lessons were learned. Matthew's storm surge flooded our coast and barrier islands as the storm moved north. Fort Pulaski reached its highest water level ever recorded at over 12.5 feet, and many communities experienced surge heights of 3 to 5 feet above ground level. Structure failures, properties that had never flooded before were inundated. Widespread heavy rain only compounded issues. More than a foot fell in many areas, causing widespread significant flooding across Georgia and South Carolina. 26 would die in North Carolina, 4 in South Carolina, and 3 in Georgia, mostly due to flooding. Of the deaths in North Carolina, over 3/4 occurred in vehicles, despite public warnings to stay put and avoid floodwaters. Historically, water, the combined threat of inland flooding and storm surge, is responsible for 90% of hurricane deaths. Avoid becoming a statistic by following the simple rule we repeat all the time: turn around, don't drown. The death toll, damage, and disruption to life for months bring up another important point. Category or classification doesn't always matter. Although Matthew's core stayed offshore and didn't technically make landfall as a Category 1 until it was north of our area, impacts for some were greater than what has been felt by storms with higher wind speeds. Remember, category and storm classification is wind speed dependent, and other possibly more significant impacts aren't considered. Discussions continue among leading experts in meteorology and social sciences to improve the communication of impact-based forecasts that are not necessarily focused on category alone.
Even though Storm Team 3 forecasts future weather, we can always learn from what's happened in the past. Coming up on Stormwatch 2020, speaking a different language when it comes to public safety, what the Low Country is doing to keep its Latin community safe during severe weather. Welcome back to Stormwatch 2020. Saving lives in the Low Country. That's the goal of local law enforcement and leaders every day. But with demographics changing, Bluffton and Hilton Head Island are working on new ways to reach everyone with the best information before a storm hits, no matter what language they speak. News 3's Andrew Davis explains.
Bluffton police officers hitting the streets not just to fight crime, but to help the community when they need it most.
You have to make those concerted efforts to speak and meet with these families outside of just law enforcement matters.
Speaking to those people in their native tongue only enhances that relationship.
Can't accurately communicate what you're feeling, what you're trying to get out there. You don't know what you're going to expect.
And that's especially scary when a storm is on the way. When that first tropical watch went out this month, Officers Martinez and Sergeant Perez went out too to talk directly to the people.
We went out well in advance to make contact with these families, and they came right out to us, and we answered their questions, and you know, they were very grateful for it.
It kind of bridged that gap between the law enforcement and the Hispanic community.
But to reach a wider audience, the town went to the web and a special hurricane preparation video in Spanish on YouTube.
Oftentimes people tend to listen to what they heard or what somebody said. It's not coming from official sources. So with us being able to put the exact information we're putting out in English in Spanish as well, gets everybody the correct information at the same time. It's a whole additional layer of fear and not knowing what to do, but with us being able to tell them, hey, this is the location where the shelters are if you need it. This is the correct route to be able to take. This is what you got to wait for before you come back if there's an evacuation. That puts a lot of people at ease.
A goal these officers have every day.
It's ensuring that people within our communities are taken care of no matter what the need is.
Andrew Davis, WSAV News 3, on your side.
Bluffton Police have also created a Spanish-only tip line for questions and for people to be able to report crimes. If you would like to watch the video either in English or Spanish, we have a link on our website. Go to WSAV.com/Hurricane Central. Now, if your power goes out during severe weather for more than a few hours, how do you know the food in your freezer is still good? Storm Team 3 meteorologist Alyssa Carsley has a simple test you can do to keep you and your family safe.
All you're going to need is a quarter, a cup of water, and your freezer. First, freeze the water in the cup. Next, put the quarter on top of the frozen water, and then put the cup in your freezer. And the hard work is done. When you want to check on your food, just look at the quarter. If the quarter is right on top, your food is still good. If the quarter is in the middle of the cup, your food is likely still okay. But if you are still unsure about it, it's best just to throw it out. If the quarter is at the bottom of the cup, your food was unrefrigerated at some point and it is unsafe to eat. If you plan on staying and the power does go out, refrain from opening up your freezer. If you do so, you're letting all the cold air come out, and that will allow your food to spoil more quickly.
When Stormwatch 2020 continues, getting the help you need after disaster strikes. We'll show you what's being done at the highest levels to make sure you and your family recover faster after severe weather makes a mess of things. Welcome back to Storm Watch 2020. The pandemic is making many things more complicated, including hurricane season. The Chatham Emergency Management Agency is preparing now in case the worst happens. WSAV News 3's Ricardo Lewis is on your side with what they have planned.
Hurricanes don't care if there's a global pandemic. Hannah is the first named hurricane of the 2020 season that barreled down on southern Texas and likely won't be the last.
This year is so much more complicated.
Complicated because of COVID-19. Chatham Emergency Management Services is keeping you informed with a virtual conference on how to handle a hurricane during a pandemic. Community Outreach Coordinator Chelsea Sawyer says officials will give details on preparation, planning, response, and recovery during this unprecedented time.
Because you've got a lot of people that wouldn't mind evacuating that don't really want to stick around for a hurricane or for any type of storm. But now have that added pressure of, what do I do? Where do I go?
The Savannah Civic Center will still be used as the staging area with social distancing measures in place. Sawyer says some residents say they don't feel comfortable evacuating to a COVID-19 hotspot.
We've got to think about how we're going to physically distance our residents, if there is a shelter-in-place order, if there's an evacuation order.
In addition, social distancing people on buses. In the past, there were 20 buses transporting residents to inland shelters. That number will double to 40. CDC and American Red Cross guidelines are recommending 110 square feet per person in shelters. That number is usually 40 square feet.
We have to figure out how we're going to make that work.
While we don't know how hurricane season will shape up yet on the coast of Georgia and South Carolina, emergency officials say to have a plan in place as some are still putting the pieces back together from past storms.
And that was a pretty difficult time.
Ricardo Lewis, WSAV News 3 on your side.
Over the past few years, it seems as though the planet is seeing more and more disastrous storms, ongoing flooding events. South Carolina has seen unprecedented and historic flooding. Some call them a once-in-a-lifetime event, or even a 1,000-year event. Now, it doesn't mean that an event can only happen once every 1,000 years, though. It means there's a 0.1% chance of it happening in any year. Problem is, it appears to be happening more than this slim chance. Here's meteorologist Scott Roberts with more.
September 2018 brought Horry County some of its darkest days, along with those worst-case scenarios you never want to happen.
We don't have 25-year storm events anymore. We have those on a daily basis now. We need to start preparing for a 1,000-year storm event because that's what we should expect.
Conway City Administrator Adam Emmerich says Florence was the area's major reality check.
We can't deal with another Florence, and we need to prepare for that next Florence. We need to prepare for Florence +4.
Emmerich thinks that infrastructure is a critical issue that is still unmet. Highways 9, 905, and 22 all flooded. And don't forget about that massive wall that kept water from taking over the 501 bypass, splitting the county in two.
It's been almost 2 years. It was a priority, and it still is a priority for us, but we are not seeing it necessarily prioritized at the state level. And we think it needs to be.
SCDOT applied for a very competitive FEMA hazard mitigation grant after the storm. It would have paid for engineering work to help improve the approaches on the 501 bypass through Lake Busby. The state found out late last year that it didn't get it.
We had 7.5-hour traffic jams in downtown Conway where every street, every alley, almost every driveway was filled with cars.
Since an immediate road fix isn't in the works for 505, the state is now turning attention to the source of the flooding. Accurate measurement from river gauges along major waterways will help towns better map out high-risk flooding areas and also to anticipate any water problems along critical roadways.
It's real-time data. They can see if conditions are changing and worsening, but to be able to tie those gauge heights to the severity of a flood or a potential flood.
SCDNR Chief of Hydrology Scott Harder says that the agency is now working to improve its river gauge monitoring network, and our local agencies interpret and use that info to protect us.
There have been gauges added to the PD along some of the major tributaries. There's been a few down along the coast. All that being said, you can never have too much data.
Harder says state agencies and private partnerships have more than 100 active stream flow and stage gauges around the state. He says DNR spends about $300,000 a year to support about 15 of those and plans to double that number by 2021. Despite that progress, Harder says that challenges lie ahead, First, getting those gauges on the same ground level to make the data easier to understand, and then
cost can be a challenge to people, but we're trying to emphasize the importance of these networks, convince the decision makers that this money is useful.
Emmerich argues it absolutely is, especially if infrastructure fixes aren't in the near future.
As a city, we need it. As a county, we need it. And as a state, we need it.
And now we're back in hurricane season.
Otherwise, we're going to continuously flood, continuously find the same things we found before.
Scott Roberts, WSAV News 3, on your side.
We are clearly seeing more extreme events. The United States has experienced at least 24 500-year events just since 2010, and this includes Hurricane Matthew from 2016. Now, let's take this stat and place it on a personal level. Imagine your home getting flooded not once, but twice by hurricanes. Do you rebuild or move on? Terry Straka, like many others in the Carolinas, is stuck in a repetitive flooding cycle.
This was my investment, and I don't want to have to sacrifice it off to what? Who am I going to sell it to? Who's going to buy it? I couldn't even morally sell it to anyone because I know what's going to happen.
Recovery efforts can be a slow, bureaucratic process, but some lawmakers are making a federal push to cut the red tape.
We had at one point over $300 million that was held at the state for over a year. And we just don't want that to happen in the future.
So a group of U.S. senators introduced the HELP Act. It would allow local and state governments to move quickly on a recovery project that is funded through FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Program. The bill allows the program to start without FEMA's required approval, which currently can take several months to more than a year.
We have to accelerate the buyout process.
To do that, another piece of legislation has been introduced that gives FEMA a 60-day timeline on making decisions on whether to buy out properties. It also allows counties and local municipalities to ask the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to distribute assistance to them directly rather than to the state. North Carolina is the first state to have its Hurricane Florence Action Plan approved, and they could get $500 million federal dollars for victims.
What we're trying to do is find the most efficient way to get the resources into the communities as quickly as possible so they can have an impact.
But before this happens, states must wait for a federal register to be published, providing rules on how to use the disaster grants. So governors are calling on Congress to formally authorize the disaster grant program. It took 500 days from the moment Hurricane Florence made landfall for the federal government to publish the Federal Register. North Carolina is still awaiting the formal grant agreement from HUD, and once signed, the state will start receiving funding and have 6 years to spend it. South Carolina, however, is still working on its Hurricane Florence Action Plan. Its Hurricane Matthew plan was approved 3 years ago, and to date, it's spent $55 of the $70 million designated to recover or rebuild homes damaged by Matthew. No money was designated for buyouts after Matthew. So for many people, just like Terry, they just hope the newest action plan will finally keep their heads above water.
I love this place. I don't want to leave, but I have to. It's critical.
For more information on the federal grant funding, go to WSAV.com. Welcome back to Storm Watch 2020. Earlier in the show, we told you how the Low Country is making sure their Latin community stays informed during severe weather. And WSAV is on your side in Spanish, too. WSAV.com now, reporter John Dowding explains how we're on your side throughout a storm with WSAV Ahora.
For the last year, WSAV Ahora has been on your side with important information about things like coronavirus testing and election information. As we head into what experts are saying will be another active hurricane season, WSAV Ahora will provide storm updates from formation to landfall, all in Spanish. With the help of Storm Team 3, we'll work to translate the necessary information about the storm as it inches closer and closer to our area. We'll tell you how the storm will impact us, what officials are saying, as well as when you can expect the storm to pass. This essential information is what's needed to keep you and your family safe this hurricane season. ¿Tiene una pregunta? Mándenos un correo electrónico a wsavahora@wsav.com. Nos vemos muy pronto.
You can see the latest updates and more at WSAV.com/Ahora. We hope our Storm Watch 2020 special has helped you prepare for all severe weather. Remember, no matter where you are, Storm Team 3 has you covered. Log on to WSAV.com and download our hurricane guide. You'll find a lot of the information we covered tonight and more. And download the WSAV Weather app. It's free at the App Store. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and keep looking up.